Hello and welcome to Talking Tullahoma. I am your host, Kelly Lepchinsky, and we're here today with David Wilkerson, who is the director of the most recent production at the Nashville Shakespeare Festival. So first, hello and welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And you're here today to tell us a little bit about Macbeth, which not only is the Nashville Shakespeare Festival's current production, it's coming to Tullahoma.
It is. It is. It's going to come for some student shows and then one public performance.
Okay, good deal. Now, my understanding of your direction with Macbeth, and I preface this by saying, you know, in Tullahoma, access to Shakespeare is really hit or miss.
Right.
It is taught, I believe, in the high school classes, but you have to travel to Nashville most of the time to see it. So to make comparisons, as I was just about to do, to other productions is a bit of a lost art. But I'm going to start us here by saying your take on Macbeth is maybe different than other people may have seen it done, if they've seen it done. Is that true?
That is very true.
Okay.
And I think the easiest way to sort of describe it is imagine Mad Max and then Shakespeare. And
Okay.
So, one of my first early images that I use as an inspiration was a picture of this sort of post-apocalyptic gas mask wearing figure. And I was like, okay, those are the witches.
Okay.
And so there's where I started. And our wonderful costume designer, Jocelyn, went from there and has created amazing costumes and set design and all the rest. But yeah, so it's a very post-apocalyptic, Mad Maxy take on it. And since we do so many performances for high school students, one of the things I wanted to accomplish is really reach out and grab them with it, and the response has been excellent so far.
Well, good. Now, when we're talking about the witches, just for people who might not know, we're talking about those famous lines, the double, double, toil and trouble, cauldron burn, or fire burn and cauldron bubble. And I believe we've got a
Exactly.
picture of them in their masks that we can
Yes.
throw up on the screen here and let people see what we're talking about.
Yes,
Right
yes.
there, you've got. Now, who are your three actors in that scene?
That is Kit Bulla, Natalie Rankin, and Delaney Keith. And they're amazing, and they've done lots of physical work, and I did decide early on that I wanted them on stage a lot more than they are in the actual script.
Okay.
Because they only have a couple of scenes in the actual script, and then they're gone. But for me, the sort of theme of Macbeth that I was most interested in pursuing was what happens in our lives that tempt us to deny the humanity in others. And when we do that, we lose a piece of our own humanity. And so by going post-apocalyptic, I could create these creatures in the witches that sort of feed off of the corruption and the pollution, because society's gone, and there's kind of like a radioactive, blasted sense to the whole world. But they can also, they feed off that corruption, but they also feed off the evil that results when we make those decisions. So they're like perched up on the tower, just like watching and really creepy with their gas masks on. So they're in a lot more scenes than they are just written.
And now, again, sort of backing up, just in case people aren't as familiar with the script as we might be, these witches sort of have a number of prophecies for Macbeth, who is the king. Let's do a little primer on what the story is.
Great. Well, Macbeth is one of the thanes, and that's simply just like higher-ups in this clan. And he's one of the soldiers, he's one of the generals to the king, who's Duncan. And the show starts off with they are in the midst of this very big battle against another thane who is turned out to be a traitor, and they're victorious. But while they're on the battlefield, Macbeth and his best friend, who's also a very skilled warrior, Banquo, they meet these witches, and the witches say that Macbeth, who is the Thane of Glamis, that's just like his dad, who was the Thane of Glamis, died, and so he became the Thane of Glamis. The witches say that you are the Thane of Glamis, but you're also going to be the Thane of Cawdor, who's like the next highest Thane right below the king, and then you're also going to be king afterwards. And Macbeth is floored, and then they turn to Banquo and say, and you won't be king, but your children or your ancestors will be king. And then right after that, other people come on and reveal that Macbeth is now the Thane of Cawdor because he was the traitor, and Duncan said, all right, execute that guy and give his title to Macbeth. And so that starts him thinking.
Right.
And stirs
perhaps
his-
believing a couple more prophecies
Absolutely.
that come to pass.
If one was true, well, then maybe I can be king.
All right. So now you mentioned with the gas mask and sort of a dystopian Mad Max.
Right.
Now people who have a little more background maybe went 7 years ago to see the Nashville Shakespeare Festival's version of Macbeth that I think was a Matt Chiarini directed production. Does
Yes,
that
I
sound
believe
right?
that one was, yes.
And that was with Eric Pasto Crosby and Shannon Hoppy. Now, we say dystopian for this one. That one had sort of an otherworldly, supernatural. But now you take those two things separately. How do you put that sort of line in between them? Here's what's going to separate what was supernatural from what is dystopian in mind.
That's the most wonderful thing about Shakespeare to me, is that as long as your concept is in line with themes that are present in the play, you can do so many things with it. You can set it like in 1600 when it was written. You can put it in the South during the Civil War. You can put it in a supernatural future world. You can put it in dystopian world. And as long as the themes that you're trying to illuminate are in the play, anything will work. What I like about this setting is that since it's dystopian, we can sort of see remnants of our society. And so like the set looks like this big communication tower that has been just hewn off and like fallen down to the earth. And there are like plastic wrappings all over everything. And you can sort of see like trash all over the stage and on the tower and stuff like that. And so it's neat in the one 7 or 8 years ago, it was kind of an entirely different sort of otherworldly setting. But in this one, we can sort of see our world in it, which I like.
I think, in fact, I read a review of your show which suggested that the other one was sort of not of this world, so otherworldly, whereas yours is very, very much of this world and perhaps a little bit of the moment. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we come back from this break. We'll see you in a minute. And welcome back to Talking Tullahoma. Once again, I'm Kelly Lapchinsky, and we're here today with the director of Nashville Shakespeare Festival's recent production, Macbeth, which is coming to Tullahoma, David Wilkerson. Now, as we were going into the break, we were talking a little bit about inspiration and otherworldliness and real worldliness, and one of the things that sort of led you to that vision was the idea of what we leave behind and ruins. What does that mean?
Yeah, I was looking at ruins of other civilizations that people go to take vacations to see, like the Greek ruins or things like that. And I started to think about, well, what will our ruins look like? What are we going to leave behind after our civilization goes away and in 100 years or 200 years after that? And so I started thinking of things like, well, plastic McDonald's signs, the golden arches, and a lot of just plastic trash.
Right.
And so that's what really led me to that. And I saw some pictures of like mansions with that looked like just ordinary mansions with pools inside, but that they had fallen into disrepair and they looked like ruins. And I also saw a wonderful picture of a library that looked just like a 3-story library, but it had a tree growing up through the middle of it, and nature was sort of taking it back. And that's why when I was talking to Jim Manning, who's our amazing set designer, about the tower, I wanted to include a tree snaking up through it. And so if people come to see the show, they'll see as they're looking at it, on the left side, there's this black, sort of sickly, weird-looking tree growing up through the middle of it. And so, yeah, I love that idea of what will our ruins look like.
And Jim does a very good job of conveying big ideas with small pieces and small suggestions, I guess. I did a show with him once where he covered a whole back wall with just drawers from various pieces of furniture, but hung and strung together in different ways that it just made this amazing display case for the back wall where little things could be shown in vignette. and he's really an interesting set designer to work with.
He is. He just does such fabulous work, and it's been wonderful seeing audiences, because when they come and they're just waiting before the show, there's no music in the show, but there's a wonderful audioscape designed by David Wilkerson. That's just this weird, very odd sounds. But as they're sitting in the audience before the show, they'll look through the set and see all different like little pieces, like little distressed like water bottles and like skulls, and then like cans, and just all these different little things that, taken as a whole, make up the set. But you can also look and see the little pieces. It's really fascinating.
Now, you just dropped the name, and I'm not going to let you get by without dropping that. David Wilkerson, this is your child we're talking about.
Yes, my son. He has had a very accomplished theater career already. He's played in the pit of Tennessee Rep, and he was music director for a different Nashville Shakespeare show, Shakespeare's Case, that he also performed in, and so he was the one that I wanted to create this soundscape, and he looked at sounds from like space. NASA has captured these sounds, and also from deep in the ocean, and they have this wonderful, really otherworldly, but at the same time kind of natural sound that's just eerie. And then he took like things like crickets, but then played them in reverse. So they sound like crickets, but they sound kind of off.
Right.
And as the world, and as Macbeth's choices add to the corruption of the world, the soundscape, even though the audience may never notice, gets more and more corrupted and more odd too. So that by the end, it's just very strange sounds.
Interesting. Now, Evan has another little claim to fame that comes with the fact that you have been involved with the Nashville Shakespeare Festival for more than 20 years, and he was a big part of what got you here and involved there. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. My wife and I were in New York for 5 years doing the acting thing, and we greatly enjoyed our time there. But then when Evan was born, we were like, okay, New York is not the easiest place or the most frugal place to raise a child. So we really did decide, let's find a place where we can raise a child in, and have a backyard and a swing set. And we kind of really did just open up the map and put our finger down, and we were like, Nashville, okay, well, music, but surely they've got some theater too.
Right.
And we were lucky enough that they really did.
And at that time, I think you mentioned it was about 23 years ago that was the decision making. At the time, it was still a relatively small theater community with Chaffin's Barn Dinner Theater.
Right.
Nashville Shakespeare Festival at that time was only putting on one show a year in the summer. Now they have branched out to the summer. In the winter, this obviously was the winter production. I think Tennessee Rep at the time, they were called, were still there, but we're talking probably early stages for that. Things seem a lot closer in the rear view than they are. I start doing the math, and no, they'd been around for a minute by then. But yeah, so Nashville Shakespeare Festival, going back to the fact that summer and winter, this winter production would have just wrapped up at the Trout Theater on the Belmont campus this week. And now it's going out on tour. And this is an expanded tour for the Shakespeare, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, they're going to reach, because every location they'll do student shows, and then they'll do public performances. And they're going to reach 5,000 students, which is a record for them.
Yeah.
And they're just after Belmont, they're going to go to Franklin at the Academy Park, and then they're going to go to MTSU for a week and perform there, and then to Tullahoma, and then up to Clarksville for another week. And so, yeah, it's an exciting expansion, and just to be able to bring Shakespeare to people who might not have a chance to see it otherwise.
Now, obviously, this may have been a decision made in an office that you aren't in, so you don't necessarily know how Tullahoma got onto that program, but we're very, very glad that we did. And just to make sure that we mention the dates that they will be here, they'll be in the student matinees, 10 o'clock in the morning performances, the 11th through the 14th. But the public performance is at the high school on the 14th, Valentine's Day.
Exactly.
Great show to see on Valentine's
I think the perfect show, really.
Right. 7 o'clock, doors open an hour earlier. And I don't know if you know off the top of your head, and we'll have to post this with the Talking Tullahoma, what the ticket purchasing venue is. Can you get them through the Shakes website?
Go to NashvilleShakes.org,
Okay.
which is their website, and you can absolutely get all the information, and they have a buy tickets button there.
There you go. I do remember seeing that there because ticket prices were $25 for adults, but then for the students, I believe, it was a $15 price. Does that sound right?
Yes, there are student rush tickets available, and I think those are available also an hour before the show.
Okay, yes, an hour before the show. And now these matinees, do you know, are they traveling school to school over the course of 4 days, or are they also performing at the high school on each of those days?
They bring the schools to the show.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love doing student shows because their energy and their vocal response to the shows is much less inhibited than adults, and which can be great. It can be a challenge if they get a little out of control, but I love it.
Yeah.
Because you get the instant response, and they're just right with it, and they've been loving it. So
Okay. Now, when we talk about students, what age groups are we actually looking at?
we have said basically PG-13.
Okay.
So there's some violence in the show. There's some dark themes in the show. Shakespeare never met a bawdy joke that he didn't like, so there's some bawdy jokes that are just written in the play, and
Right.
so but nothing that any 13-year-old wouldn't see on TV at home. So
Right. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more then in the next segment about, we talked about Jim Manning and his set construction. And obviously, if you're building a set that then has to go on the road, that's going to be something we want to talk about, how that works, and loading in and loading out. And we'll do that when we come back after this. And welcome back to Talking Tullahoma. Once again, I'm here with David Wilkerson of the Nashville Shakespeare Festival, and we're talking about his production of Macbeth, which is making an appearance in Tullahoma on the week of Valentine's Day. Now, as we went to the break, we were talking about what bringing it to Tullahoma means, what kind of challenge that was for set designing, for choreography, fight choreography, anything, because you're going to move from stage to stage to space to space.
Right.
How did that work out for you?
It's an interesting challenge, and Jim Manning, who designed the set, and Shane Lowry, who built the set and is also coming with it. So he's the one who's in charge of like tearing it down and then safely rebuilding it. So Jim had to design a set that could be in different spaces and different sized spaces, so that like it's a 2-story tower, but some of the spaces are a little shorter. So he actually had to make it where the tower can be its normal height sometime, but then shorter in some other places. And then some of the aspects on the side, we had to be able to move around a little bit. And so as it's moved around, and Shane Lowry moves it around and has to rebuild it in a slightly different configuration. And I did the fights. I co-choreographed them with Carrie Brewer, who's an amazing fight director. And fortunately, one of us is going to be able to go around and just sort of like tweak things and just move things around. But yeah, it's a great challenge, but it's definitely a challenge still.
And speaking of fight choreography, you know, there's one thing we didn't really touch on yet about the way that you have directed this show in this dystopian post-apocalyptic world. How important fighting is to determining who you are in the society.
Right, and that's always a challenge in directing any Shakespeare, is that he wrote, since in Shakespeare's day, all the roles were played by men. And so all the women's roles were played by the young apprentice boys, and then as they grew up and grew into their voices, they played the male roles. So most of the characters are technically written as men. But we have a big group of very talented actors of non-male genders. And so I always look for a way to include them as well. And since I was creating a whole world, I really wanted to create a world in which gender was not based on what you're born with, but your abilities. And so in this world, if you are a great fighter, if you are strong, you are called him. You are called a man, you're called a husband. And if you're more nurturing or protective or since children are rare in this post-apocalyptic world, if you are able to give birth, you're a woman. And so, which led me to be able to cast when Elise Dawson, who's an amazing fighter and just a strong, strong actor, auditioned, I was able to cast her as Macduff, which leads us to a wonderful fight at the end with Sam Ashdown, who plays Macbeth, and they're both excellent fighters. And so Carrie and I were able to choreograph a very fun, complex, really awesome fight for them to do.
Okay. Now let's assume that we've attracted some fans of Nashville Shakespeare Festival who aren't just waiting for the show to come to us, who have gone to Nashville, either to the Trout or to the previously the band shell. Now there's even a new downtown, One City. So let's assume that some of our viewers have seen previous productions. They will have seen Sam Ashdown before.
Yes, he's been in several shows for us. He was Mark Antony in Julius Caesar. He was Hamlet in Hamlet, and I was really interested in him for Macbeth because I didn't want Macbeth or Lady Macbeth, who's wonderfully played by Mariah Paris, to be just sort of two-dimensional villains, to be like she's just ambitious and power hungry, and he's power hungry, and they're just evil. I really wanted them to be characters who are more three-dimensional than that, and that's why I place particular importance on the fact that they've recently lost a child, because Lady Macbeth says that she has nursed a child before, but later on, another character says that they don't have any children.
Right.
So it's in the script that they've lost their baby, but I wanted to make it really immediate because I think that's a lot of what informs their decisions and makes them more human and makes them just like less of two-dimensional villains and more complex actual like human beings.
Right. Okay. So now we talked a little bit about Sam. I don't know Mariah as well. She's not making her debut though, is she?
No, she was actually, she grew up in Nashville, and she was a part of our summer apprentice company. And then she actually lives in New York now.
Oh, okay.
Where she's doing very well. But she auditioned and came back home to do the show. And so, yeah, they do a wonderful job.
Well, great, and we'll get to see that wonderful job right here in Tullahoma once again. Those dates, now the 11th through the 14th, they'll be performing student matinees at Tullahoma High School for kids who come to them. But the public performance is set for Valentine's night, 7 o'clock. Doors open an hour earlier. You can get your tickets on the Nashville Shakespeare Festival website. Thank you for watching Talking Tullahoma. We'll see you next time.